Hi everybody, welcome to another tutorial for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Today we're looking at holding patterns, the different types of entries, how to complete the direct entry, which is the most straightforward, and we're also looking at an introduction to wind corrections in the holding pattern and how to work out where your wind's coming from and how to adjust your timings and wind corrections to take account for those. Um, One thing to note is whenever I made this video, I was using the TBM autopilot, and I believe the TBM autopilot does slightly slower than a rate 1 turn, and that's why the timings aren't always working out correctly. I talk about it further in some of the other videos for the entries in the holding patterns for the parallel entry and the teardrop entry, but basically the autopilot does slightly slower than a rate 1 turn, which is why the timing, whenever I worked out the wind corrections correctly, still ends up being over 3 minutes. So that's the reason for that. But hope you enjoy the video. If you do like it, please and subscribe for more videos. And as always, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks.
Okay, so what you can see here is you can see our plate still of our holding pattern that we're going to talk about. But first of all, let's have a look at our holding pattern entries. So the most basic type of holding pattern entry is the direct entry, and you can see this is a direct entry here, and basically all you're going to do is come along from somewhere around this general area. We'll talk about that in a minute, and you're going to go straight overhead the VOR, and you're going to turn straight outbound. You're not necessarily going to come straight down the inbound leg, but you'll come somewhere within this kind of general area, and you'll come overhead the VOR and go straight outbound, enter your holding pattern straight away. So on the plate, you could be coming anywhere from kind of this side of the area, straight overhead Bovington VOR, straight outbound. That's the most simple. Direct entries are really straightforward, and yeah, they're probably the easiest ones. Well, they are the easiest ones to do. The next one we'll look at is the the parallel entry. The parallel entry is one of the more trickier entries, and this would basically be if you were coming from somewhere along this bottom quadrant here. So you would be coming in somewhere from this direction, and what you do is you go overhead the VOR and you turn on the reciprocal of your outbound leg. So the reciprocal of your inbound leg. So you go on to what your outbound leg would be, but you just track. So you go overhead the VOR, track that outbound leg out for 1 minute, and then you do your rate 1 turn, come back around, and then you go straight at the VOR, and then you go outbound. So probably one of the more trickier entries to get perfectly. And sometimes the airliners actually don't fly these very well. I used to fly the Jumbo, and it used to really screw up entries sometimes. They're like fly really weird entries, but would manage to get in the holding pattern somehow anyway. So so the next type of entry is the teardrop, or also known as the offset entry. I call the teardrop. I'm not sure if that's the US terminology because I did some US training, but yeah, it's known as a teardrop to me anyway. And it would be if you're kind of coming in somewhere over here and on this direction, and you would basically fly overhead VOR, and you would go straight out. So a parallel and a teardrop are basically the opposite of each other. You would go straight outbound here, and you would fly a heading 30 degrees off what your outbound heading was, and we'll talk about that. And then you would come inbound, and you would get straight onto that inbound radial. Then so you'll start tracking that inbound radial here, and you'll have a good idea of what the wind correction is going to be then, because you've already established yourself on this radial, and you'll know kind of what correction you need to put on for drift. So it's a nice one to do because you kind of already get yourself set up for the holding pattern before you even get there. But anyway, so that's the entry types, and we'll have a look at how you fly those in a minute. So the next important thing we need to look at, so this is really the first important step into flying one. So after you know all the basics of what they are, so the first thing that you need to know is what entry you're going to do. So there's a technique that we use. Some people call it the pod method. So we'll briefly look at the pod method, and then we'll jump in the plane and we'll show examples of it. So what it is basically is it's using your compass or your HSI, horizontal situation indicator, and you're working out just by looking at your inbound course and the direction of the inbound leg to the holding pattern, and then you put your thumb up. So for a right hand turn, you'll put your thumb on the right side, and so that'll be a standard hold. And if it was a left turn, a non-standard holding pattern, then you would put your left thumb up and you would work it out this way. So you can see each of these quadrants. So if your inbound course would fall in this quadrant, then that would be an offset entry or teardrop entry. And then if your inbound course to your holding pattern fell into this quadrant, then that would be a parallel entry. And here this would be a direct entry. So it shows you very quickly how you would get into the VOR. So it's pretty straightforward to do, and we'll have a look at it in the plane because it doesn't really make much sense on paper, me anyway. But as soon as you get in and kind of fiddle around, you'll see. Okay, so here we are flying in our TBM. We're at 9,000 feet, or flight level 90, standard pressure setting. And we've got the autopilot engaged. We're flying on the heading at the minute. And we've got Bovington VOR tuned on our radio, 113.75. And you can see it's coming up with the ident, Bravo November November, there and there. And this is our DME distance, 12 nautical miles. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to head straight towards the VOR, and we're going to work out our entry into the VOR. So we can see that first of all the inbound course is 117, so we need that set on our HSI here. So we're going to set 117. So there's 117 set our inbound course, okay? So here's our pod method. And so we are flying direct to the fix, which is the first thing. Secondly, we've set our inbound course, which is the second thing. So now what we're going to do, we're only 8 miles away, so we need to be fairly quick. So this is why this method is great. So we put it's a right hand pattern, so it's a standard pattern. So we're going to put our thumb up on the right hand side. So we go across to the perpendicular, so it's 90 degrees off, and we come up 20 degrees, and that's where we would put our thumb. So we're covering this bit. This quadrant would be our teardrop, this would be our parallel, and this would be our direct. So how do we figure out which one we're in? Well, we look at our outbound course line. So our outbound course line is here, and we know that this area is the direct entry, so it's going to be a direct entry. So what we're going to do is we're going to fly overhead, we're going to turn it outbound, and we're going to set our timings, and we're going to fly overhead the VOR. So let's bring up our plate again. Let's get it zoomed in where we want it. I'll make this a bit smaller. Right, so there we're going overhead the VOR. You can see, well, we're getting very close to it if we're not overhead, so we'll just kind of correct it a little bit, and it's going to swing very soon, I'd say. And it's just kind of starting to turn, so you can tell that we're not directly overhead because it's being really slow to turn. If we were directly overhead, it would just go swing in one big swoop. So right, that looks like we're passing overhead the VOR, and this entry won't be perfect. Your first entry probably won't be perfect, and so that's just turned to our outbound course. So our outbound course was 297, right, and we're not taking any consideration for wind at the minute. There is wind on, but we'll show you how to work that out. So we're turning on to 297, and obviously the more directly that you're flying to the inbound course, so if the closer you are to the 117 inbound, your direct entry is going to be easier. We were quite a bit off there. We're kind of coming fairly off the inbound course. So we're setting our course to our outbound of 297. So our heading's on 297. And there is wind, but we'll not worry about that for a minute. We'll just see how this first holding pattern works out. So we're already past. Next thing is to set our timer once we're at beam our 90 degree point. So you can see we're already past that. So we're going to start our timer. And the idea is that we fly out for 1 minute. So it's 1 minute inbound, 1 minute outbound, and 1 minute for every turn. So the whole thing should take 4 minutes. And it's important while you're flying a holding pattern to maintain your same indicated airspeed. So we'll try and maintain around 200 knots. Right, so we're at 45 seconds at the moment. You can also see it here, that's good. We're getting ready on our heading bug, and now we're going to turn to the inbound course. So we're going to set the heading bug slightly off, so because we know we need to re-intercept this radial. So this is our inbound leg. And you can see the radial's already moving in, so we're a little bit shallow, so we're gonna have to turn. So you're watching this line on the turn and adjusting for that. So we didn't go deep enough into the turn, and that's because we were already about 40 degrees of the way around the turn before we even started. Maybe even more, maybe like 90 degrees of the way around the turn before we started. But now what's really important is we recapture that inbound radial and we establish ourselves for the next hold. So this first loop round is still our entry procedure, so it could be a little bit off. But after we go overhead the beacon the next time, we want to have everything nailed. So what's important now is to get that inbound radial, track it now inbound to the VOR, so that we can get ourselves set up nicely for the next hold. We're only 4 miles away, so we're quite close, so it's really important to get on that radial. And because we are quite close, it should correct quite quickly. And we can use our indicator for the VOR to know as well, so it's nice to have that, gives a bit more situational awareness. Right. So it's slowly coming in. And if we had established better on the inbound leg after that turn, we would be working out our wind, our drift, to try and work out our wind corrections. Right, there it's coming in now. We're going to turn back. We're only 2 miles, so we're pretty much overhead the VOR. But we want to fly as close to it as we possibly can. And we're going to see it swing very soon, I think. But we don't want to chase it. We don't want to chase it too much. So once we get close, we just kind of accept that's how close we got. And that's the way it was. Right, so there it's completely lost data. It's gone overhead, so we're turning to 297. Oh no, it's turning the wrong way. Keep it autopilot. Right, so. And you can see that should have been about 3 minutes. So it took us longer because we set our timer on the outbound leg. It should have been around 3 minutes to get to that point. So we know we've got some wind corrections to do, and we'll have a look at those once we get established on the next leg. So we're turning now. I will not put any drift on this time. We'll just see how it works out, right? Because the last time wasn't very good. And we can see we've got wind on here. So, and we could put on our wind reading. If it was an instrument rating exam or something in real life, we would have looked at the forecast winds, so we would have had those as kind of a rough guide of where the wind direction was coming from and roughly what speed. We would have worked out some rough drift corrections, but because it's this flight sim, we haven't done that, so we can just play around with it. So right, that's us nearly established on our outbound heading without any wind corrections. And we're waiting now for this needle to show that we're 90 degrees off from our VOR. And there it is, so we start our timer. So as we're going out in this leg, we'll have a quick talk about wind. So we can see that our HSI is telling us, the aircraft's telling us that there's some wind on because it's very smart. So we know there's some wind pushing us towards the VOR. So what that's going to do is, so the wind's somewhere from over this left-hand side of the aircraft. So it's going to push us towards the VOR, and it's going to make capturing this line, this inbound radial, more difficult. So whenever we turn inbound, we're probably going to fly through it again, and we're going to have to correct. So the next time we do our holding pattern, we'll put in some wind corrections, and we'll show you how to do that, and we'll put in some timing corrections. So what we'll do is we'll get to 1 minute, and we'll start our turn in, and we'll see how it all works out. It should be slightly better than last time, but it's probably still going to be a little bit rough because we haven't put that wind correction on. And this is where you would expect this needle roughly to be, right? Let's start our turn. And it's just, I would say that it's going to need to fly through again, so I'll adjust it as we go around. And we're basically dependent on our autopilot to be doing a rate 1 turn now. If we were in a Cessna, we would put the little plane, probably should do something in it actually, but you would put the wings on the turn coordinator on the rate 1, right? So you can see we've gone through it again. That's what we expected with the wind. So we're going to chase it up again. So yeah, in a Cessna you would use your rate 1 dial to do your turns, and you would put the wings on that rate 1 pointer. In an airliner or on a TBM, something like that, you're relying on the autopilot to do the same rate of turn. So 30 degrees bank or 25 degrees bank, something like that would be fairly standard in an airliner or something like this. Let's flip that over for the fuel, and you can see, yeah, we've overshot it again. So this next time we're going to put some wind correction in, we're going to put some drift corrections, and we'll also have a look at how our time works out. So and this is how you do it, and whenever you're learning to fly, you fly it, you see how it worked out, and then you adjust it for your next one, and you try and get it closer and closer. So after, you know, 2 or 3 times around the hold, since you've had your forecast winds at the start as well, 2 or 3 times around the hold should be enough for you to get bang on to that holding pattern entry, or that inbound course, sorry. And you can see that we're overhead the VOR, but our time's a little bit off as well. So I think we flew outbound for too long. So what are we? Let's see, we're about, yeah, there, we're going past it now. So we're about 20 seconds, 25 seconds off. So let's turn now back around on our outbound course. Oops. Right, so we know that we got blue through the inbound course that time. So the wind is coming from our left hand side on the downwind leg for sure. So somewhere from the 210 direction, something like that. Or so what we're going to do this time is we're going to put in some wind corrections. So normally what you do is you put in 3 times your drift. So whatever your wind correction is to hold your inbound course, you would do 3 times that in order to establish yourself correctly for the inbound leg. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 5 degrees to start off with. So we'll put 5 degrees of drift on the inbound leg, so we're going to put 15, so you times it by 3. So it's 297 minus your 15, so that's what, 282, so let's put 282 on our heading. So we're going to stop our timer, reset it, and we're already past 90 degrees, so we're going to start it again. So I'm also going to do it for 50 seconds this time. So last time our time was too high, so it took us way more than 3 minutes. It took us like 3:25 to get out over their head the VOR again. So we can tell that we've probably got a tailwind on this leg and it's pushing us further downwind, and then whenever we turn back inbound it's taking us longer to get established. So now we've got our wind correction in. It's going to make it a lot easier to establish on that inbound course once we make the turn. And because we've done 50 seconds outbound, it should work out more or less about right whenever we get overhead the VOR again. So there's 40 seconds, so now we're getting ready to make our turn. We've put our 3 times drift on, so we know if this works out about right, we're going to have about 5 degrees of drift once we get inbound. So let's start our turn. We'll set our intercept. We'll be hopeful this time that we've worked it out right. And you can see it's coming in quite nicely. This is swinging around nicely, so I'm gonna... If it works out perfectly, what should happen is as the aircraft's turning around, it should just turn the whole way around and land on this. So we shouldn't need to re-intercept it, it should just work out perfect, but let's see how it works. Yeah, and it looks like it's gonna work out near pretty close to perfect. So let's put the heading on our inbound. And we know that we're having drift from this kind of 210, well, somewhere on this side, the wind is somewhere on this side. So we know that we have to put 5 degrees, we said, of drift on. And that's just a guess to start off with. You know, you're just taking a stab in the dark at what it might be. So the autopilot's been really slow to turn around here, so we're going to intercept this again. And we've just kind of flown through it a little bit. So that was, you know, that was fairly close. So next time we might need to put a little bit more drift on. But it's pretty close, and our timing's working out pretty well this time. I think it's going to work out nearly perfectly. So we did 5 degrees of drift at that time. This time let's put on 7 degrees of drift. So let's see how that works out. So we're going overhead. We're fairly close now. We're turning back onto that. There goes our needle, it's completely gone, so we know we're directly overhead, and we're going to turn back, and our timing was just short of 3 minutes, so that's pretty good. So let's start the turn back round. Last time we did 282, so this time we're going to do 21 degrees of drift, so 297 minus the 21, so that's what, 276? So that's set 276 as heading. We'll reset our timer, ready to set it whenever we're going a beam the VOR. And our time was just short, so going outbound for 50 seconds was just a little bit too much of a correction. So this time let's go out for 53. Let's see how that works. Right, so there we're on our heading, we're on a beam start. So what you need to be is you need to be a beam, but you need to be wings level. So that's roughly where we are. So we've started our timer and we're going to go out for 53 seconds. It's quite nice if you can put your trace on of where your aircraft's been. If you put your trace on after you get a holding pattern right, you'll be able to see the outline of it, and it shows it nice and perfectly. Can't do that on Flight Sim yet, unfortunately, but whenever we can, it's quite rewarding whenever you actually crack it and get it bang on. Right, so we're already over our time, sorry, so I missed the 53, but it might work out pretty good. So we did about 57 there. So I'm not going outbound for longer. gives you more chance to get established on the inbound radial. It's not it wouldn't be a standard thing for a holding pattern, but you know, if you were getting used to them and getting established on that inbound leg is the most important thing. Once you get established on it, and you know the drift that you've got on to establish on that, then you're laughing. You've got everything that you need. And what we'll do is we'll go overhead and we'll actually put on the wind here, and we'll have a look at what the wind is. Right. And you can see it's working out quite nicely again, so I'm going to turn that heading the whole way around. Plus our 7 degrees, so it was 117, plus our 7's 124. That's 124. And actually, the 7 degrees was a little bit too much, so this is what we want though. We want to just shallow out our turn, re-establish on that, and then go back to our what did I say it was? 124? Can't remember. That'll do anyway. Yeah, you can see I've even messed it up now by correcting it. But yeah, really kind of close. Very, very close to getting it bang on. Just it messed up the re-intercept. But there we are, overhead again, right? And then we're going to turn around again. And that was 3 minutes. So that worked out. So yeah, there you go. What we'll do is we'll just turn around back onto whatever it was last time, 276 or something I think it was. Can't remember what I said. And what we'll do is we will put our wind on. And there's quite a lot of wind. There's 30 knots of wind. So you could see how that was kind of difficult to work out because we didn't have any idea. If we were doing this for real as a student pilot or something, we would have had a look at our forecast winds and we would have been expecting something from, you know, that direction at 30 knots. So I have live weather on, so that's actually what it is at the minute. So now that we know where the wind direction is coming from, you can see that actually we had a bit of a headwind. We should have flown outbound for longer. So that's our drift on, we're wings level, we're at about the right place. So that's reset that, start our timer. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go outbound because we've got that tailwind on our last segment inbound. I'm going to fly out. I'm going to fly out for a third of the wind, so it's 29 knots, but it's offset. So I will fly out for another 7 seconds. So I'll do a 1 minute 7 leg. Let's see how this works out. Right, let's turn now. Oops. Clicking this with my wheel. Right, and we're going to turn the whole way around. And we're going to see how it works out. The autopilot on the TBM is quite slow to turn the heading. On an airliner, it's a bit, well, the airliners I use, it's a bit quicker. It's quite hard to get used to in this. Alright, so how's that working out? So we should see this bar starting to move in now. There it is, there it goes. And this is coming in. This is coming in really nicely. So our inbound heading's 117, and we had about 7 degrees of drift on. So let's do 124. Let's put that on now, and by the time the autopilot actually turns to it, which is really, really slow, hopefully we're about right. And 30 knots of wind is a lot to kind of practice on, so I recommend you probably just use calm winds, to be honest. I'll put calm winds on for the other entries just to make it a bit easier. But yeah, you can see that that's pretty close. So you would just tweak the heading a little bit. Oops, that was a lot. A little bit, I mean like 2 or 3 degrees, not 10 that I did there. And it'll just drift slowly back on. I mean, that's really close, so that you would be happy with that. You would want this line to be nailed, but for flight sim and fiddly knobs and the slow autopilot, that's pretty good. Boom, we're straight over the top. And if we look at this, I mean, there you go. That you can't really complain of that. ATC would be happy with that anyway.
So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that helped you learn a little bit about wind corrections and how to carry out the direct entry. Direct entry is really straightforward, so we'll look in other videos with calm winds how to do the parallel and the offset entry, because they're a little bit more complicated. As always, if you like the video, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you in more future tutorials. Thanks.